Hello there, and welcome back to part 4 of this tutorial series. If you haven't been following along, then I strongly recommend you go back to part 1, since we will be continuing with the examples that we built up through parts 1, 2 and 3. In this part, we're going to replace some of the drawing calls with pygame sprite renderers, and we're going to store some player attributes like how many lives they have or what level the player is on, as well as just cleaning up some of the code a bit. So to start with, we need to import one of pygame's sprite renderers. So we're going to use the render updates renderer. We'll come back to that later, but for now we want to add a class of player, and we're going to use this class as a kind of data bag just to store information about our current our current player state, so what level they're on, things like that. So they need an initialization function. And we're going to add in just some arguments to this. They're all going to have a default value as well, based on what I think a reasonable default value would be for a new player in a game. So that's a score of 0, we'll give them 3 lives, and the starting level will be 1. And then we just need to store those into instance variables. So we'll need to adjust our main function down here so that we actually create a player at the beginning of the game. And so on new game, we add line player equals player, and we're just going to keep the default values that we set up in that initializer. And we also want to add a new block in here for if we need to go to the next level. So we'll just borrow that line there. We're going to say next level. We'd also then need to just add this up here. So that's in our game state enum. We need a next level option. And then we need to increment the current level by 1. And then we're also going to call the play level function here. Okay, so we've created our player, and we are increasing the current level when they go on to the next level. So the next thing I want to do is to tidy up the code a little bit. So you might remember from part 3 we actually sort of copied and pasted some of this. We've got this very similar looking game loop in both of these, title screen and play level. We might need to add more functions to this game for different particular game screens, and then we're going to have another one of these loops. Well, it's not very good, so we're going to create a function called game loop, and then we can call game loop from both play level and title screen, and it'll just remove this duplication. So def game loop, and we're going to accept arguments for the screen and for buttons. So we'll keep the buttons declared in their specific functions, but then we're going to call this game loop down here to clear away these loops here. So actually I think we can, if we take the chunk of code from title screen where we have multiple buttons that we enumerate, call the update on, and put that down here. Fix the indentation, and that's all we need to do for that game loop. And then we can simplify our title screen and play level code. So we can remove this here and just return the result here of game loop. So remember, game loop is going to return a UI action, which is a game state enum. and that gets returned to here, and then title screen will return that back into main here, and then we'll have a new game state that we can check for these other possible game states. And then similarly, play level, we're going to need to add this return button to a collection. Oh, excuse me, this is supposed to be a renderer we're supposed to be using now. So actually what we want to do here is go buttons equals render updates, and then add in our return button. And similarly, we want to replace this button collections here. We don't want a list, we actually want a render updates collection. Okay, and then similarly we can get rid of all of this because this is in our game loop. And we copy this line from up here if we like, or just type it out, it's not very long. But we're just going to return the result of game loop again. So one last thing actually is that although we can keep button.draw down here in this loop because we copied game loop from a previous title screen function, so it's remained unchanged. This will work, but one of the advantages of using Pygame's sprite renderers is that we don't actually need to call .draw individually on the button. And instead, we can change this to draw across the entire collection in one line. It's actually possible to do a similar thing for update, where we could have buttons.update. But the problem with doing that is that we actually want to get the result of each button, or we need to check the result of each update call to see whether or not an action has been returned. So we can't do that in this case. So now I've changed that, let's have a go at running this code. Oh, excuse me, I have typoed one of our imports, so let's go to the top of the file. There we go. So that needs to be pygame.sprite. Let's try again. Okay. Quit button still works, that's a good sign. Our buttons are still responsive. We can click the start button, we go to return main menu. Okay. So everything's still working as expected. But it would be nice if we had another button in our game that maybe progressed us to the next level so that we can check whether or not our player class here is storing the information correctly and whether or not our main loop is handling this this current level increment correctly and things like that. So let's go back down to play level, and we're just going to copy and paste this button and make a new one. And I think we can just call this next level button. Let's get rid of that underscore, don't really need it. We'll put this somewhere in the center. Can make it a bit bigger as well. And what I'm going to do is change the text value so it actually tells us something about what the next level we're going to move on to is. So I'll use the F strings way of formatting. Okay, so that means our button, excuse me, we also need to accept that up here into our play level function, because otherwise we don't actually know anything about the player and what the current level is supposed to be. So now we've added that argument, let's just go back to main, and we need to make sure we pass in a player object to both of these play level functions. Okay, back down. Let's have a quick look over this. Right, we also need to make sure that the game state is set correctly when that button is pushed. So we actually want to set it to be next level. So what's going to happen is this button is actually going to display the text next level, and then have the number of the level that we'll go to after clicking this button. Okay, one more thing, we need to remember to add this button here to our renderer. There we go. And that should be that. Okay, great. So we've got our return to main menu button, and then we've got a next level button where the change in current level has been stored in our player instance, and it gets passed back in each time. If we go back, return to the main menu, and then click Start again, we've created a new player instance, which we've done here, and that's why this next level always resets after going back to the title screen. Okay, so that covers everything I wanted to do in this tutorial. So we've seen how you can create a title screen and a little menu system and some buttons, all in Pygame, and keep the game logic quite tidily. Obviously now it would be quite easy to flesh out play levels so you have more game logic. So thanks very much for following along all the way to the end. If you want to subscribe to my channel, please go ahead. And remember, all of this content's also available on my blog in written form, programmingpixels.com. You can sign up to our mailing list there so you can get notified of new blog posts, as well as follow me on Twitter or anything like that you want to do. All the links are on the blog, and I'll put them below in the description. So thanks for watching.